The wind howled like a living thing. It clawed through the pines, dragging sheets of snow across the valley until even the trees vanished in white. Jack Rains tightened his hood, leaning into the storm. The mountain was supposed to be quiet this time of year. No tourists, no traffic, no ghosts. But the silence tonight wasn't peace. It was warning. He had been heading back from the ridgeline after checking his traps when he saw it. Something dark, half buried near the frozen creek. At first he thought it was debris from another storm, maybe a fallen branch. Then the shape twitched. Jack's instincts kicked in before thought could. He trudged through knee-deep snow, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the whiteout. When the light finally found it, his chest tightened. It was a dog, a big one, coated in grey and black fur now matted with blood and ice. The animal lay on its side, barely breathing, a low whimper lost in the wind. He dropped to one knee. The dog's flank was soaked crimson. Its back leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and just above the wound the fur was burned away, a clean, seared line. Jack didn't need long to recognize it. A bullet graze. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. He checked for a pulse. Weak. The dog's chest rose shallowly, its breath catching as if every inhale cost it something. It wasn't wild. There was a faint outline on its neck where a collar had once been. A soldier's animal, maybe. Abandoned. "Hang on, buddy," Jack said quietly. His voice sounded strange, as if he hadn't spoken aloud in days. He slipped his arms beneath the dog, grunting at the weight. Even injured, the animal was solid muscle, maybe 90 pounds of dead weight and loyalty. He carried it through the storm toward the cabin, a lonely wooden structure half buried in snow. The wind screamed behind him like it wanted to drag both of them back. Inside, warmth hit them like a wall. The old stove hissed, the fire snapping. Jack laid the dog down on a wool blanket near the hearth. Steam rose from its fur as the ice melted. The animal whimpered once, weakly, eyes half open, amber eyes, alert even through pain. Jack crouched beside it. He had seen those eyes before. Not these exact ones, but the kind. The eyes of something trained never to quit. He could see it in the way the dog's muscles tensed even in exhaustion, the way it tried to stay alert, to guard. "You're not some lost mutt," he murmured. He went to the back of the cabin and pulled out a metal case. The medkit inside was military issue, years old but intact. His hands moved without hesitation, cutting away blood-soaked fur, cleaning the wound with antiseptic. The dog's breathing quickened, but it didn't growl, didn't resist, only flinched once. "You've been through worse, haven't you?" Jack whispered. He worked in silence, the rhythm of it almost comforting. It reminded him of another life, the hum of a helicopter, the smell of cordite and dust, the weight of a brother's hand going still in his grasp. He shook the thought off, tightened the splint on the shattered leg, and stitched the flank with surgical precision. The dog let out a low, guttural sound. Not fear. Something closer to gratitude. By the time Jack finished, the storm had swallowed the world outside. He sat back, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and stared at his patient. The firelight flickered across the dog's face, catching the faint scars near its muzzle. Not old, not deep, but enough to tell a story. This animal had worked for someone, somewhere brutal. Jack poured water into a small bowl and set it near the blanket. "Drink if you can." The dog lifted its head with effort, eyes locked on him. For a moment the cabin was silent except for the hiss of the fire and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Then slowly, the animal dragged itself forward, tongue touching the water. It drank, each swallow sounding like survival. Jack exhaled, a tightness in his chest he hadn't noticed finally breaking. Good. That's good. He watched as the dog's eyes began to close, its breathing settling into a steady rhythm. Jack didn't move for a long time. He'd lived alone for nearly 3 years, ever since the Navy discharged him after that mission in Kandahar. Since then, the only heartbeat in this cabin had been his own. Now there were 2. The snow hammered the roof, trying to bury them both, but inside the fire burned steady. Jack leaned against the wall, exhaustion catching up to him. He told himself he'd take the dog down to the vet in Glenwood Springs once the roads cleared. He told himself this wasn't his problem. But the lies didn't hold long. He couldn't shake the feeling that the dog wasn't here by accident. That bullet wound wasn't random. The direction, the burn pattern, it wasn't a clean shot from a hunter. Someone had tried to kill this animal. Jack studied it again. Even asleep, the dog's ears twitched at the sound of the wind, its paw flexed, like muscle memory from 100 commands. He'd seen dogs like this before, years ago, working beside SEALs overseas. Military canines, smart, loyal, deadly efficient. This one was trained, disciplined. "Where'd you come from, Ghost?" he murmured. The name slipped out before he could stop it. Maybe it was because of the pale scar along the dog's muzzle, or because it had appeared out of the storm like a ghost from his past. Ghost didn't stir, just exhaled deeply, the way soldiers do when the fight is finally over. Jack stood, poured himself a cup of coffee, and stared into the fire. Outside, the mountain screamed, but inside, something had shifted. The man who had spent years trying to forget the world had just saved a piece of it. And though he didn't know it yet, that wounded dog lying by his hearth had just dragged him back into a war he thought he'd left behind. For the first time in years, Jack, Rains wasn't alone, and neither was Ghost. Morning came with a dull blue light leaking through the frost-rimmed windows of the cabin. The storm had lessened to a slow, drifting snow, the wind no longer screaming but whispering cold warnings across the mountains. Jack woke to silence, not the empty kind that haunted him, but something still alert. Ghost was awake. The dog lay on the same blanket near the hearth, eyes open and locked onto Jack like he'd been watching him sleep. Not out of fear, not hunger, just watching. Waiting. Jack swung his legs over the side of the bed and sat up. His body ached, not from exertion but from tension he hadn't even realized he was carrying. Ghost's ears flicked forward. The dog's gaze never left him. "Morning, soldier," Jack muttered, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He moved slowly, deliberately. The kind of movements you make when sharing space with something that could kill you, if it wanted to. But Ghost didn't react. No growl, no flinch, just that steady, unnerving calm. Jack boiled water for coffee, poured a bowl of fresh water for the dog, and set down some leftover venison stew from the night before. Ghost didn't pounce on it like a starving animal. Instead, he looked to Jack first, as if waiting for a command. "Go ahead," Jack said softly. Only then did Ghost move. He approached the bowl, sniffed it, and ate in controlled, measured bites. Nothing wasted, no frantic hunger. Jack had seen that before, in the chow line overseas. This dog wasn't surviving. He was trained. After breakfast, Jack knelt to check the bandages. Ghost remained still, tense only when Jack pressed too hard on the splint. But he didn't snap, didn't yelp, just stared at the wall with a 1,000-yard stare Jack knew all too well. Then came the first moment that hit Jack like a hammer. He reached for a roll of gauze on the nearby shelf. His hand moved too fast, an old habit from his field medic days. Before he could blink, Ghost's entire body tensed. Not a flinch of fear, but the kind of muscle memory that belonged to war fighters. 1 second of coiled readiness, a breath away from action. Jack froze. Ghost didn't look at him. He scanned the cabin instead, ears up, eyes sharp. Then just as quickly, the dog relaxed. It was like watching a tripwire stretch and go slack. Jack let out a breath. "That's not normal," he whispered. He worked in silence, eyes studying every scar and mark on the dog's body. That bullet graze, it hadn't been a random wound. The fur around it was cleanly singed, burned. The entry angle was too precise. It wasn't a wild shot or animal fight. Someone had tried to kill this dog. Jack touched the edge of the scar again, and this time he felt it. Just above the skin, a faint melted pattern in the fur. He pushed gently aside the coarse hair, and what he saw made his stomach clench. It was a seared line, laser straight, heat damage, gunfire. This hadn't been a coyote attack. This wasn't some freak hunting accident. Someone had aimed and fired at Ghost, and missed killing him by less than an inch. Jack sat back hard on his heels, mind racing. What kind of dog survives a shot like that? What kind of dog limps through a blizzard to a cabin miles from anywhere? What kind of dog waits, alert and patient instead of collapsing into trauma? Not a stray, a soldier. "Who the hell are you?" Jack asked quietly. Ghost gave no answer, just blinked, calm, watching. By noon, Jack had restoked the fire, cleaned up the living space, and was sitting with a mug of coffee, trying to ignore the itch in the back of his skull. But Ghost wasn't ignoring anything. He sat near the picture window facing west, body still, ears alert. At first, Jack didn't think much of it. Dogs liked windows. They liked movement. But Ghost wasn't tracking deer or listening for rabbits. He wasn't watching anything that moved. He was waiting. The dog stared at the distant ridgeline, one of the higher peaks Jack knew was nearly inaccessible this time of year. Snowfields, rock ledges, a whole stretch of terrain that not even search and rescue teams ventured into unless lives were at stake. Ghost hadn't moved for nearly 20 minutes. Jack stepped up beside him. "You see something out there?" No response, just that rigid posture. Later that evening, Ghost was still at the window. Only now he had started to make a low, soft whine. Not a bark, not panic, just need. Jack crouched next to him. The snow had started again, thick flakes drifting like ash across the world. "Talk to me," he said under his breath. Ghost let out a frustrated huff through his nose and nudged the glass with his snout. Then back to Jack. Then to the window again. It wasn't random. It was communication. The dog began pacing, slow, limping steps across the floor, from Jack's chair to the window and back. Then he stopped and looked straight into Jack's eyes. He barked. Once, then turned back to the window and sat down again. It was the most deliberate act Jack had seen all day. The message was clear. Whatever happened to Ghost didn't end here. Someone tried to end him, and he wasn't done with them yet. And if he'd come to Jack, specifically Jack, it wasn't by accident. The cabin felt smaller somehow, not like a sanctuary anymore, but like a staging ground, a command center waiting for movement. Ghost wasn't a question mark anymore. He was a warning. And Jack knew deep in his gut. This dog hadn't wandered into his life for shelter. He'd come with a mission. And now, that mission had a second man on board. By the third morning, Jack had stopped pretending this was temporary. Ghost was pacing again, eyes locked on the western peaks like there was something out there clawing at the edge of his mind. The snow hadn't let up. Wind still scoured the valley, carving sharp lines into the drifts. But visibility had improved just enough to see, beyond the tree line. Jack stepped beside the dog. Ghost didn't turn. He was frozen, ears perked, tail rigid, body aimed at a jagged ridgeline like a rifle on target. "What the hell are you trying to tell me?" Jack muttered. Ghost let out a short, low bark. Then another. Not frantic. Commanding. Jack grabbed his binoculars from the cabinet. He hadn't used them in months. Too many memories. Too many nights spent searching for something that never showed, but this time felt different. He raised the lenses and scanned west, the cold biting his fingers even through gloves. At first it was all white and grey, a wasteland of trees and snow and sky. Then he saw it. A line. It wasn't natural. A long scar etched into the side of a slope, like something had torn through the snow at high speed. A crash trail. Jack adjusted the focus. The line disappeared into a dense grove of pine. No visible wreckage, but it was long, wide, and angled, consistent with an aircraft losing altitude fast. Beside him, Ghost whined again, this time sharper, more urgent. Jack kept scanning. Another anomaly caught his eye, a faint wisp of grey in the sky, curling upward from below the tree line. Smoke, not much. Barely more than a smudge in the blizzard. But it was there. He lowered the binoculars. "You brought me here for this," he said quietly. Ghost's tail gave a single thump on the wooden floor. His amber eyes met Jack's, unblinking. The pieces snapped into place. The bullet wound, the scars, the trained behavior. Ghost wasn't just escaping something. He had survived something. And now he wanted to go back. Jack dropped the binoculars onto the table and reached for his pack. He hadn't planned to leave the cabin for days. Supplies were low. Gear untested. But none of that mattered anymore. His gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 2 tours, was screaming. Something was wrong out there, and Ghost wasn't just pointing him toward it. He was requesting backup. The two of them stepped outside into the storm. Jack's breath crystallized instantly in the air. Ghost limped, but didn't falter. The snow was deep, but his movements were deliberate, purposeful. They hiked toward the ridge. Jack kept his rifle slung but close. The snow muffled every sound except the crunch of his boots and the rhythmic drag of Ghost's steps beside him. An hour in, the trail grew steep. Trees thinned. The wind came back stronger, slapping across Jack's face. But he pushed forward, relying on muscle memory and the way Ghost moved like he already knew the terrain. Jack paused at the edge of a rise. Below, the forest broke open into a sloped basin, framed by sheer cliffs. That was where he saw it up close. The crash trail carved into the mountain like a wound. Trees snapped, snow churned in waves, debris scattered like breadcrumbs. And there, nestled just at the base of a rock wall, was the unmistakable shape of a plane's tail fin, half buried in snow. Ghost growled. Not fear, not uncertainty. Recognition. Jack raised his binoculars again, heart pounding. The tail section was twisted, metal peeled open like paper. The fuselage ahead was partially covered, but he could make out the broken curve of windows and shredded insulation. There was no fire damage, no black charring. This wasn't a fiery crash. It had skidded, which meant survivors were possible. His eyes shifted, scanning the area around the wreck. That's when he saw them. Tents, 2, small, camouflaged, nearly invisible under a thin layer of snow. Camp. His pulse quickened. No rescue teams, no helicopters, just a smoldering burn pit with a crude ring of rocks. And in the middle, that faint trail of smoke still rising into the storm. Someone was alive. And hiding. Ghost barked once, sharp and loud. "Quiet!" Jack hissed. He crouched lower, scanned again. No movement. The wind masked everything. But something in the pit of Jack's stomach twisted. Why the hell hasn't anyone called for help? Ghost stepped forward to the edge of the ridge, his body trembling. Not from pain, but from the restraint of holding himself back. Then he did something Jack had never seen. He turned to face him and barked again. Loud, demanding. Then he pawed at the snow, like digging, like urgency given shape. "You want me to go down there?" Jack said. Ghost barked again. His tail thumped the ground hard once, then stopped. He stared. Jack looked back toward the wreckage. Too clean. Too hidden. A crash was chaos. But this was silence pretending to be wreckage. This wasn't just a crash site. It was a staging ground. Jack gritted his teeth. His breath came sharp. Ghost began to pace, limping in tight circles, then returning to the edge and staring down. A low, frustrated growl rumbled in his throat. "All right," Jack said, standing. "You win." He pulled his scope from the side pouch and adjusted the reticle. Switched to thermal. Nothing. Too much snow. Too much interference. He looked down at Ghost, who was now staring straight at the wreckage, a quiet sentinel with the body of a warfighter and the soul of something ancient, something loyal. Jack knew that stance. It wasn't hope, it was duty. He exhaled, chest tightening with something that hadn't stirred in him for years. This wasn't about the dog anymore. This was a mission, and someone down there needed saving. The wind was a living thing, relentless, cutting, moaning through the cliffs like it wanted to bury them both. Jack moved low, pressed against the side of the slope, boots punching through fresh snow, pack weighed down with gear. Ghost followed just behind, favoring his injured leg but never hesitating. They had been moving for nearly 2 hours, weaving through thick woods and narrow ridgelines, slowly descending toward the crash site Jack had spotted earlier through his binoculars. The blizzard had returned with force, visibility shrinking to 20 feet, snow driving sideways in sharp gusts. It was no place for a man, let alone a wounded dog. But Ghost didn't falter. The slope beneath them narrowed. Jagged rocks jutted out beneath the snow, and each step felt like a guess. Jack planted his boot carefully onto what looked like solid ground, but it gave way. He slipped. The world tilted. His pack yanked him backward, and he was suddenly falling, down and toward nothing. Cold panic surged in his chest. His arms flailed, searching for something, anything, to catch. Then came a jerk. Pain exploded across his shoulder as teeth clamped into his jacket. Ghost had lunged, catching the fabric near Jack's collar. The dog's claws tore into the icy ground, legs spread wide for balance. For a terrifying second, both man and dog teetered on the edge. Jack managed to swing his ice axe around, slamming it into the slope just inches from a sheer drop. The steel bit deep. He pulled hard, using the embedded tool as leverage to claw his way back. Ghost held on, muscles trembling, refusing to let go. When Jack finally scrambled up to solid ground, panting, the dog released him. They locked eyes, snow swirling around them. "You saved my ass," Jack whispered. Ghost just stood there, breathing hard, tail stiff, waiting for the next order. No doubt now, this wasn't a pet, this was a soldier. They reached the perimeter of the crash site just before dusk. From behind a large outcrop, Jack got his first full look at the wreckage. The plane had broken in half near the fuselage, the tail section buried in snow, nose crumpled against a cliff wall. Debris was scattered along the impact path, shredded seats, ripped luggage, a twisted wing jutting upward like a broken blade. But something was off. No emergency beacon, no signal flares, no movement from the wreckage. Just silence. Then, near a gaping tear in the fuselage wall, he saw it. Footprints. Fresh. Jack scanned the area again, heart thudding. A makeshift fire pit had been built just inside the open cabin, and behind the flickering shadows of flame, 2 figures moved. One was crouched by the fire, feeding it with scraps of seat foam and shattered trim. The other, a girl. She was maybe early 20s. Slumped against the side of the cabin, leg propped up awkwardly, face pale and dirt-smudged. Blood darkened the fabric around her thigh. Her eyes were wide, glassy, fixed on the flames. But she wasn't alone. The man beside her was moving with a kind of control Jack didn't like. Too efficient. Too careful. He watched the girl more than he watched the fire. Not helping. Guarding. Jack's grip on the binoculars tightened. He watched them for 10 minutes. No words, just the snap of wood and wind and the girl's shallow breathing. Something was wrong. Suddenly the man stood and turned his back, kneeling to tend to a corner of the fire. The girl shifted. Slowly. Her eyes darted toward the cabin wall, toward a crack in the fuselage, one Jack just happened to be watching from. She raised her hand. Her fingers trembled, but she moved with quiet purpose. Thumb tucked, 4 fingers extended. Signal, not a wave, not random. It was the silent distress gesture, the kind used by hostages, taught in self-defense workshops, whispered among victims. "Help me." Jack sucked in a breath. She held it for 2 seconds, then dropped her hand and went still. The man hadn't noticed, but Jack had. He backed away from the ridge, dropping behind the outcrop where Ghost waited, ears perked, body still as stone. "She's in trouble," Jack said. "She's alive, and he's the reason." Ghost growled low, teeth just barely visible, amber eyes fixed on the path ahead. Jack looked out at the storm swirling around them, and back at the broken plane holding a secret too dangerous to ignore. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was a hostage situation. And they were the only ones who knew. The wind had quieted, but Jack's pulse hadn't. He crouched behind the rocky outcrop, binoculars pressed to his face, watching the twisted wreckage in the distance. The man, Gabe Hensley, he assumed, was tending the fire again. Back turned to the girl. She hadn't moved since the signal. Her shoulders slumped with the weight of pain or fear. Probably both. Jack lowered the binoculars, heart pounding. He looked down at Ghost, who sat rigid beside him, waiting for the unspoken command. If he rushed in now, Hensley might kill her before Jack could stop it. But if he waited too long, the girl might not survive the night. And if the storm worsened, no one would survive. It was a no-win scenario, the kind that leaves bodies in bags. He touched Ghost's shoulder, firm and deliberate. "Stay," he said softly. Ghost let out a low whine, ears twitching. "Stay," Jack repeated. Ghost lowered his head slightly, a signal of submission, but his eyes never left the plane. Jack gave the dog one last look, then slipped into the storm. He moved low, using snowbanks and debris as cover, approaching from the crumpled tail section. The plane groaned under the weight of wind and ice, metal shifting with age and damage. Every step had to be perfect. He reached the fuselage, pressed against the outer wall, and listened. Voices. Not a conversation, just one. A man's voice, angry, pacing, muttering to himself. Jack edged closer, keeping beneath the broken windows. "Just a little longer," Hensley was saying. "Storm breaks, I hike out. No one ever finds this place. No one knows. Loose ends tied." There was movement, the sound of something metallic, a gun being checked, reloaded, maybe. Jack's jaw tightened. This wasn't survival. This was cleanup. He crept to the side of the fuselage where the opening was largest, crouched below the shattered rim, and peered inside. Hensley had his back to him again. The girl, Emily he assumed, was now lying on her side, arms wrapped around her ribs. Jack could see bruises blooming along her cheek. Hensley turned. A pistol hung loose in his hand. He crossed to a nearby pile of luggage and rummaged through a duffel. Jack moved. In a breath, he slipped into the fuselage, silent as a ghost. He stepped behind a wall of shattered seats and crept forward, boots muffled by snow. He was 6 feet from Hensley when the bastard turned. Their eyes met. Hensley froze. Then, with terrifying calm, he raised the pistol. Jack lunged, grabbed the man's wrist and slammed it against the wall. The gun fired once, loud, deafening in the metal tomb. The shot missed, burying itself into the floor. The two men crashed into the wreckage. Hensley fought like a cornered animal, wild and brutal. He slammed an elbow into Jack's ribs, twisted, tried to bring the pistol around again. Jack drove a knee into his thigh, grabbed the weapon, and they fell into a tangle near the fire. Emily screamed. The pistol clattered away. Hensley reached for a shard of broken paneling. Jack barely rolled away in time. The sharp edge sliced air where his throat had been. They collided again, fists, knees, elbows, grappling for control. Jack landed a punch to Hensley's jaw. The man staggered, then lunged with the shard, catching Jack's shoulder. Pain flared. Blood bloomed. Jack fell back, chest heaving. Hensley grinned. "You picked the wrong fight, soldier." Then came a sound, not from inside the plane. A snarl. Jack's head snapped toward the opening. Ghost! The dog was a blur, grey, white, rage in motion. He had disobeyed the order. He had come anyway. Hensley turned at the last second, but it was too late. Ghost hit him like a freight train, teeth sinking into Hensley's forearm. The man screamed, the shard dropping from his hand. They hit the ground. Ghost didn't let go. Jack pushed to his feet, limped over, and ripped the shard away. "Ghost!" he snapped. The dog froze, breathing hard, teeth still embedded but not tearing. "Let go." Ghost obeyed. Slowly. But he didn't back away. He stayed between Hensley and the girl, low and ready, growling. Jack kicked the pistol away, then rolled Hensley onto his stomach, pressing a knee into his spine. The man was bleeding, groaning, but still alive. Jack tied his hands with cord from his pack, then turned to Ghost. "You weren't supposed to follow," he said, voice hoarse. Ghost looked up at him, amber eyes steady, unapologetic. Jack gave a tired laugh. "Yeah, I'd have done the same." Behind them, Emily was crying, silent, relieved tears. Jack knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he said. "We've got you." She nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the storm began to rise again. But inside the broken shell of that aircraft, warmth bloomed, for the first time not from fire, but from the thin thread of something stronger. Loyalty, unbreakable, and just in time. The storm raged on outside, rattling the twisted walls of the wrecked fuselage like a warning. Inside, the world had gone quiet. Jack sat with his back against a broken seat, shirt soaked in sweat and blood. The fire smouldered nearby, flickering shadows over the crumpled cabin. Emily leaned against the far wall, wrapped in one of the emergency blankets, her face pale but composed. Gabe Hensley was face down, hands bound behind his back with cord and snow-wet paracord from Jack's pack. He stirred occasionally, groaning as the pain caught up to him. Ghost lay between Jack and the prisoner, his body curled but his ears still alert, tail resting like a coiled line of defense. The dog had returned to stillness, but something in his eyes had changed. He was calm now, not just relieved, but complete. Jack glanced over at Emily, who had been watching Ghost like she was trying to see through time. "That dog," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "His name isn't just Ghost, is it?" Jack hesitated. "He didn't have one when I found him, or maybe I just didn't know it yet." Emily swallowed, sitting straighter despite the pain in her splintered leg. "He's my brother's. I'd recognize him anywhere." Jack looked up. The words didn't register at first. "Your brother?" "Owen," she said, and her voice broke on the name. Owen Clark. Everything inside Jack froze. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. Owen, the man who dragged him out of burning wreckage in Afghanistan. The man who made Jack laugh when laughter was a foreign language. The man who bled out on a slab of sand and didn't get a funeral, just a folded flag. Jack reached slowly for his wrist. There, hidden under the cuff of his coat, was a leather bracelet. 3 strands, woven, faded from sun, sweat, and time. Owen had made it during their last deployment. 1 for Jack, 1 for himself, 1 for his kid sister. Emily saw it and gasped. "I have the same one," she whispered. She tugged back the blanket to show her wrist, and there it was, a matching bracelet, though hers was newer, less weathered, still holding shape. Jack sat stunned, staring at her, then slowly turned toward Ghost. The dog had raised his head, watching them both. His ears perked slightly, not in alarm, but in recognition. His tail gave one slow, heavy wag. "You're Owen's," Jack said, the words catching in his throat. "You're his dog." Emily nodded through a sheen of tears. "His name was Ghost, full K9, trained with Owen, deployed twice. They were inseparable." Jack remembered now. Owen talking about the new K9, a ghost grey shepherd with a nose like radar and the heart of a lion. The dog who once dragged Owen 20 feet back behind cover after a convoy ambush. Jack had never met him. Owen hadn't brought Ghost stateside before the last mission. Until now. Somehow, against every odd imaginable, that dog had survived. Wandered through snow and bullets, across mountains and storms, and found the one man Owen had trusted most. To finish what he couldn't. Jack looked at Ghost. "You came to get me." Ghost held his gaze. No bark, no wag. Just the steady stillness of a soldier at attention. Emily was crying now, quiet tears streaking down her dirt-smudged face. "When the plane went down, my father was flying us. We had documents, proof, about a cover-up tied to a rare earth mining project. Government money, corruption at the top. Owen was investigating it before he died. My dad picked it up after. That's why we were targeted." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Hensley?" "He was our co-pilot. We thought he was just a contractor. Turns out he was planted, sent to make sure those documents never reached the press." Jack's fists clenched. He rose and moved toward the back of the fuselage, digging through the wreckage until he found the metal briefcase Emily had pointed out earlier. The lock was busted, pried open during the crash. Inside, despite the cold, the contents were dry. Papers, photos, flash drives, and one worn notebook packed with hand-scribbled notes and signatures. Jack flipped through it. Maps, satellite images, names. One of them he recognized. A retired senator. Another was a current defense contractor. He let out a slow breath. "This is huge." Emily nodded. "My father knew it. So did Owen. That's why they both died." Jack stared at the storm beyond the cracked windows. For years he thought Owen's death was a random casualty of war, just another statistic in a long line of good men lost for nothing. But this was different. It wasn't fate. It was murder. Ghost let out a low chuff, rising to his feet. He stepped toward Jack, limp still visible but determined. He didn't need to speak. He already had. "You weren't just meant to save the girl. You were meant to finish the mission." Jack turned to Emily, voice steady. "We get this out. We blow it wide open." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Owen trusted you." Jack looked back down at Ghost. So did he. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. And inside it something shifted. Not just grief. Not just duty. Purpose. Real and roaring in his chest. Jack Rains had been asleep for a long time, but Ghost had woken him. And now, he wasn't walking away. The radio crackled like a dry flame in the quiet cabin of the downed plane. Jack turned the frequency dial slowly, locked in on the emergency band, and pressed the transmit button. His voice was steady, calm, deliberate. "Mayday, Mayday. Civilian aircraft crash. Coordinates unknown. mountain basin west of Iron Ridge. 1 injured survivor, 1 detained hostile, 1 military-trained K9. Need immediate evac. Will transmit every 15 minutes. Repeat. Mayday. He released the button and waited. Silence. Then static. Then a clipped mechanical voice. Copy that. Transmission received. This is Mountain Search and Rescue. Tracking signal. Stand by. Jack exhaled. His shoulders dropped. Emily let out a soft cry and covered her mouth. She'd been trying to stay strong for hours, but now that help was real, tangible, it all hit at once. Ghost sat between them, facing the cabin's entrance, still and upright like a marble statue. His breathing was slow, focused, not resting, guarding. He had limped for miles, torn through snow, saved a man's life and taken down the one who tried to kill his family. But Ghost didn't let himself collapse. Not yet. Every 10 minutes, Jack checked the radio. Every 30, he gave an update. This is Jack Rains, former SEAL. Wreckage is unstable but intact. We have fire. Medical attention needed for civilian female. Possible femur fracture. Hostile subdued and bound. The response was short but firm. Understood. We're dispatching ground search from North Ridge. Estimated approach, 1 hour. Overhead support rerouted. Chopper en route. Sit tight. Outside, the blizzard was beginning to break. Grey sky split to show slivers of pale gold. Snow still fell, but no longer sideways. The wind softened to a low hush that whispered against the metal skin of the plane. It was Ghost who heard them first. He sat up straighter, ears forward. Then he let out one low bark, a single note. Jack grabbed the binoculars and moved to the opening in the fuselage. From the ridge above, figures in neon orange parkas moved with efficiency and purpose. Ropes were lowered, ice axes dug in. 2 of them began to descend the slope in sync, professional, calm, fast. He keyed the radio again. Visual confirmation on rescue. 2-man descent team from North Ridge. You're coming in from the right angle. Keep low. Plane's fuselage is exposed. The reply came instantly. Affirmative, Rains. We've got you in sight. 2nd unit will drop behind. Confirming that the FBI air unit is now en route. Copy. Jack blinked. FBI. There was a pause. Evidence from your earlier transmissions was routed through Homeland channels. The nature of the documents you referenced, this just became federal. He glanced back at the briefcase. Inside it, paper trails that could pull down politicians, contractors, and corporations alike. Everything Owen and her father died to protect was inside that steel shell. Jack turned to Emily. Your brother's mission is about to go national. She nodded, eyes wet. And so is yours. The rescue team breached the fuselage within 10 minutes. The lead was a man in his 40s named Parks. Grey beard, no nonsense. His second, a younger woman named Ray, moved like she'd rappelled through worse than this. Medical first, Parks said, kneeling beside Emily. We've got a litter. We'll get her stable, then hoist. Emily reached for Jack's hand as they strapped her in. You're not going anywhere, right? I'll be right behind you, Jack said, giving her hand a firm squeeze. She looked at Ghost. And him? Ghost stood beside them. His eyes scanned the rescuers, but his body stayed between Jack and Hensley. No growl, just presence. Protective. Silent. He goes up with us, Jack said. Parks raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Understood. The second rescue team arrived with a sling harness fitted for working dogs. Ghost didn't flinch as they fitted it to his body. When Jack knelt beside him and clipped it into his own, the dog rested his head briefly against Jack's chest. A gesture of trust. And a goodbye, if needed. Jack whispered low. We're almost done, soldier. The rotors came first, a low thump in the distance that built to a roar. The helicopter broke the clouds above, massive and grey, with the unmistakable seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation stamped on its side. This wasn't just rescue, it was exposure, justice, and reckoning. Hensley was lifted last, still bound, cursing through bloodied teeth, eyes wild with the realization that this wasn't the endgame he imagined. 2 FBI agents took him at the ridge. No questions, no hesitation, just steel cuffs, read rights, and a long, cold stare. Jack stood beside Ghost on the edge of the mountain, wind whipping at his coat, eyes squinting into the sun. He wasn't the same man who had locked himself away in that cabin, a ghost in his own life. He wasn't just a SEAL with memories or a medic without purpose. He had followed a trail through snow and silence, led by a dog carrying the final will of a fallen friend. And in doing so, he had become something more than what he'd left behind. Not just a man, a guardian. Ghost stood beside him, tail high, body still. The soldier who never forgot. The mission was complete, but the healing had just begun. The mountains looked different now. Not smaller, not softer, but familiar, like the face of someone you once feared and now understand. It had been 3 months since the storm. Jack stepped onto the cabin porch with 2 mugs of coffee, steam curling in the crisp morning air. The snow had long since melted, replaced by the soft greens of spring. Wildflowers broke through the thawed ground, and the pine trees swayed gently in the wind like old sentries breathing again. He set 1 mug on the railing and sat on the top step. Ghost was already there, stretched out across the planks in full sun, his head resting on Jack's worn combat boots like they were the most comfortable pillow in the world. His fur had fully grown back, silver streaks catching the light. His flank bore a faint scar, one of many, but his eyes were clear, and his body moved with ease again. Jack reached down, rubbed behind one ear. Ghost gave a lazy grunt, but didn't move. For once, the soldier was off duty. From inside came the sound of soft humming. Emily. She was baking. Again. Jack had converted the back room of the cabin into a full kitchen, something it hadn't seen in 20 years. The place had windows now, curtains, a real stove, a second-hand coffee grinder that Jack swore she'd use even if it killed him. They had sanded the floors, scrubbed out the mold, replaced the old cots with warm bedding. There was music sometimes, laughter too. Life had moved in, and not just here. Down the valley, on a piece of donated land, construction had begun. Emily's idea, the Owen Clark Center, a retreat for veterans and first responders, a place to rest, to reconnect, to rebuild. She hadn't left the mountains, and neither had Jack. He'd tried to, once, packed a bag, got halfway to Denver, but something inside him pulled back like a tether. Not guilt, not fear. Home. It wasn't the cabin, or the trees. It was what had happened here, what had been healed here. Ghost stirred, stretched, and shifted only to replant his head on Jack's other boot. "Don't get up on my account," Jack muttered. Ghost thumped his tail once, the lazy kind of acknowledgement that said, "I hear you. You're welcome." The screen door creaked. Emily stepped outside with 2 more muffins in hand. She wore a faded hoodie with the center's logo on it, a pine tree wrapped in a protective spiral. She handed Jack one and dropped the other on the step for Ghost. "You spoil him," Jack said. "He deserves it." She replied, "So do you." Jack nodded, took a bite. Blueberry, still warm. The same kind Owen used to wolf down during those endless desert ops. Funny what stuck. They sat for a while in silence, watching the world stretch out around them. Below, the ridges rolled like waves of stone and shadow. A hawk circled high above. Somewhere behind the cabin, water trickled from a spring they had reopened, clearing out years of leaves and mud. It ran now, clean and cold. Emily looked down at Ghost. He's different too. Jack nodded. He rests now, because he trusts we've got his 6. Ghost didn't lift his head, but his tail thumped again. The peace wasn't perfect. Nightmares still came. Some mornings started with sweat and silence. Jack still reached for his weapon in dreams. Emily still woke from them clutching at memories of falling sky and fire. But they had each other now. A rhythm, a system. And in Ghost, they had an anchor. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out an old brass tag. The name etched into it was worn but still legible. Ghost, K9, Unit Noah 117. He looked at Emily, then down at the dog. I think it's time to retire this properly. Emily smiled softly. Want to do it at the center? We're hosting the first family weekend next month, honoring fallen handlers and their dogs. Jack nodded. Yeah, he should be there. He clipped the tag onto a new leather collar. Clean. Strong. Fitted it gently around Ghost's neck. The dog didn't move. Didn't need to. The ceremony had already happened, long ago. On a mountain, in a storm, when he chose to come back for the last soldier who hadn't yet come home. Now they all had. Ghost, Jack, Emily. They weren't what they used to be. But they were family now, and the war was finally over. The walls of the new building still smelled of pine and fresh paint. Sunlight poured through the wide windows, casting soft golden light across rows of hand-stitched quilts, framed photographs, and wooden benches carved by local veterans. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the therapy garden out back, where a pair of retrievers chased each other through late summer leaves. Inside, the air held the scent of brewing coffee and warm cinnamon rolls. Emily's doing again. Jack walked through the main hallway of the Owen Clark Foundation's flagship center with Ghost at his side, every step a reminder of how far they'd come. 3 months after the rescue, they had officially launched the foundation. It had started as a quiet idea, just a way to honor Owen and to give something back to the people the world kept forgetting. Veterans broken in silence, dogs retired into cages, survivors who never stopped reliving the fight. But then stories started pouring in. Messages, donations, letters from families who'd been saved by a soldier and his K9. They hadn't expected it. The outpouring was nationwide. There was the boy in Wyoming whose life was saved by a retired bomb dog during a gas station explosion. The widow in Florida who said her husband only spoke again after being paired with a former military shepherd. The former sniper from Kentucky who simply wrote, "Your story gave me a reason to get out of bed again." The people remembered, and they responded. Within 6 months, they'd raised enough to build 2 centers and fund therapy programs for over 50 veterans and 6 retired K9s. Emily had taken charge of operations. Her name was on every grant application, every donor briefing, every press interview. But Jack saw what others didn't, how she always came back to the mountains when it got overwhelming, how she still kept a weathered photo of Owen in her wallet and touched it before every decision. And Ghost, he became something else entirely. More than a survivor, more than a hero, a symbol. The photo had been taken by a volunteer named Isaac, a young Marine with a camera who'd never shot a frame before that day. It was simple. Ghost lying on the cabin porch, ears perked, eyes focused, the early morning light catching the silver streaks in his fur. It wasn't posed, it wasn't polished, but it was perfect. It now hung in the main hall of the center, printed in black and white on canvas, framed in oak. Beneath it a plaque read, "He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth." Visitors stopped there first. Always. Kids would trace the edge of Ghost's ears with their fingers. Old soldiers would pause, lips pressed tight, nodding slowly before they moved on. Some left medals below it, others just a hand on the wall. One man, A retired general who had flown in from DC stood there for almost 20 minutes. When he turned to leave, he only said one thing to Jack. "That dog did more than most of us ever could." Jack didn't argue. Ghost never needed to prove anything. He had done what no mission had asked of him. He had come back. He had remembered. He had saved not just one life, but every life that now walked through those doors and found a second chance. The Foundation trained service dogs now, paired them with PTSD survivors, helped transition working dogs into peaceful retirement. They also offered wilderness retreats, crisis support, trauma-informed therapy. Every program bore Owen's name. But Jack had insisted on something else too. Every dog who graduated from their program received a leather collar, hand-woven by volunteers, with 3 strands braided tight. 3 strands like the bracelets Owen used to make, one for the handler, one for the dog, and one for the bond between them. That afternoon, Jack stood near the garden with a mug of black coffee, watching a teenager toss a tennis ball to a nervous black shepherd named Ace. Ghost lay nearby in the shade, watching with the calm confidence of an old warrior. Every time Ace hesitated, Ghost gave a low chuff of encouragement, just loud enough to be heard. The ball would be caught, eventually. That's how it always went. Emily joined him a moment later, brushing dirt from her hands. She was helping a new group of volunteers build a reflection bench beneath the tall cedars. There was dirt under her nails, but she looked happy. Alive. "They asked if we wanted to give a talk at the conference in Austin next month," she said. "Veteran Mental Health Summit, big platform." Jack sipped his coffee. "You should go." "We," she corrected. He gave a faint smile. "I don't do podiums." "You didn't do foundations either." Ghost gave another chuff, as if seconding her point. Jack looked down at the dog, then back at the center, the hills, the children, the peace that filled the air like smoke from a fire that had long gone out. "This," he said softly. "This is enough." Emily reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. Legacy wasn't just about what you leave behind. It was about who carries it forward. And Ghost, the dog who never stopped guarding, had made sure that the mission would never be forgotten. Sunlight filtered through the tall pines outside Jack's cabin, now more home than hideaway. The snow was long gone, replaced by golden fields of switchgrass and the low hum of summer cicadas. It was quiet here, not the silence of isolation, but the kind that held peace. Jack sat on the porch, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand. The cabin door was open behind him. From inside, he could hear Emily typing, working on a grant proposal for a new satellite center near Boise. She was relentless, tireless, just like her brother had been. But Jack's eyes weren't on the valley. They were on the old trail beyond the trees, the one Ghost always watched. The shepherd lay beside him, stretched out in the sun. His fur had gone grayer over the past year, but his body was still strong, still agile. He had been through hell and clawed his way back. Now, even in rest, Ghost radiated that same protective calm. A living perimeter, a sentinel. "Still guarding, huh?" Jack murmured. Ghost opened one eye, let out a low sigh, and shifted his head onto Jack's boot. No response needed. His presence said it all. Across the yard, a dusty SUV pulled into the driveway. The rear window bore the familiar decal of the Owen Clark Foundation, a dog silhouette against a mountain crest. A young veteran stepped out, a woman in her 20s, slight build, marine tattoo visible on her forearm. She looked around cautiously, like the world might still be watching. Her name was Rainey. PTSD, survivor's guilt, 4 deployments. Behind her, the passenger door creaked open. A dog stepped out, a brindled German shepherd, lean and alert, ears twitching at every sound. His name was Ash. A rescue. discharged after an IED blast took part of his hearing, muzzled in shelters, labeled too reactive. They had both come here to see if healing was possible. Ghost stood slowly. No bark, no growl, just a tall, regal figure moving with slow purpose. He crossed the porch, padded down the steps, and made his way toward them. Ash froze, tensed. Rainey reached for his collar, but then Ghost did something unexpected. He sat, just sat, right in the middle of the yard. His ears relaxed, his gaze soft. An invitation, not a command. Ash stared at him, every muscle ready to bolt. Then he took a single step forward, and then another. Jack watched as the two dogs closed the space between them, not with words, not with force, but with trust. Ghost let Ash circle him, sniff, size him up. Then, with the slowest, most deliberate movement, Ghost lowered his body into a crouch and rolled slightly to the side. Submission, respect, permission. Ash let out a tiny whuff, then sat down beside him. Rainey burst into tears. Jack stood and walked over, letting her cry, letting the moment hold. He offered her a bottle of water. Didn't say much. She looked up at him with red eyes and whispered, "I didn't think anyone would understand." "We do," Jack said. "We've been where you are." Later, Emily came out with sandwiches. They sat around a makeshift table in the yard, under a canopy of old trees. Ash curled up near Rainey's feet, while Ghost lay under the bench, close but watching everything. Jack leaned back, looking at the flag flying gently near the barn. It wasn't a government flag. It wasn't political. Just a single symbol stitched onto a white field. A paw print over a mountain range. The logo of the Owen Clark Foundation. There were now 3 centers across the country. Dozens of dogs placed with survivors. Hundreds of lives reconnected to purpose. All because one dog refused to die in the snow. Refused to forget his training. Refused to give up on his mission. He hadn't just survived. He had led. Ghost had become more than a hero. He was a legacy. That night, after the guests had left and the lights dimmed, Jack sat back on the porch again. The stars were coming out one by one, blanketing the world in a soft hush. Emily sat beside him, a book in her lap. Ghost rested at their feet. No barks, no patrols, just presence, just peace. Jack spoke softly, to no one in particular. "Some say dogs don't have souls, but I've seen courage walk on 4 legs. I've seen loyalty outlive grief, and I've seen one dog change the course of more lives than any war ever could." Ghost shifted slightly. Jack reached down and stroked his fur. Still warm, still steady, still guarding. If you've ever been changed by a dog, if you've ever been saved by one, this story is for you. And if Ghost reminded you of a companion of your own, we want to hear it. Subscribe to our channel, support our mission, and share your story in the comments. Because sometimes the bravest soldiers don't wear boots. They wear fur, and they never stop guarding, even when the war is over. What's your story with a loyal German Shepherd?